Ethan Cole had lived most of his life in silence. Hollow Creek Ranch stretched wide and empty around him, acres of land that echoed with the low calls of cattle and the steady creak of fences swaying in the wind. At 40, Ethan was known in the nearby town as the quiet rancher who kept to himself. He worked hard, paid his dues, and avoided questions about why he had never married. The truth was simpler and heavier than gossip. He had never learned how to let anyone get close. Loneliness had become routine, almost comfortable, until the night the storm arrived. Dark clouds rolled in fast, swallowing the sky just as Ethan was finishing his rounds. Thunder cracked so loud it rattled his chest, and rain followed in sheets cold and relentless. He was running toward the barn when he saw her, standing near the broken fence, drenched, clearly panicked, struggling to shield her face from the wind. She looked wildly out of place, like someone who had wandered into the wrong story. "Please," she called out, her voice shaking. "My car slid off the road." Ethan didn't think. He waved her toward the barn and ushered her inside, the heavy doors slamming shut behind them as rain hammered the roof. Up close, he noticed how her hands trembled and how strands of hair clung to her cheeks. She introduced herself as Clara, thanking him over and over. Embarrassment and relief tangled in her smile. They sat on overturned crates, the storm roaring around them. Ethan poured coffee from his thermos, his hands clumsy with nerves. Conversation came slowly at first, where she was headed, how long he'd lived on the ranch, but something about the isolation made words easier. Clara laughed softly at one of his awkward remarks, and the sound settled warmly in his chest. When thunder boomed overhead, Clara startled, and without thinking, Ethan slipped his jacket over her shoulders. Their fingers brushed. The contact was brief, accidental, yet it left him breathless. He retreated to the loft later, giving her space, staring up at the wooden beams as the storm raged on. That night, listening to the rain and knowing she was just below him, Ethan realized how empty his life had been before this moment. The storm wasn't just outside. It had cracked something open inside him, and he knew that by morning, nothing would feel quite the same again. The storm did not ease with the night. Instead, it pressed closer, as if the world beyond the barn had disappeared entirely. Wind screamed through the cracks in the walls, and rain fell so hard it felt endless. Sometime after midnight, the power cut out, plunging everything into darkness. Ethan climbed down from the loft and lit an old lantern, its warm glow filling the barn with trembling shadows. Clara sat nearby, knees pulled to her chest, looking smaller than she had earlier, the confidence of travel stripped away by the isolation. "You live all the way out here alone?" she asked quietly, her voice careful, as though she didn't want to disturb something fragile. Ethan nodded. "Always have." The words came out flat, but inside they stirred memories he rarely allowed himself to touch. He offered her another cup of coffee, then sat a little distance away, unsure of where to put his hands, his gaze fixed on the floor. Hours passed with slow conversation. Clara spoke about drifting from place to place, relationships that never quite held, and the exhaustion of feeling unseen. Ethan listened, surprised by how much he wanted to understand her. When she asked about him, he hesitated, then answered honestly. He spoke of long days, quiet nights, and the way loneliness could become so familiar it stopped, hurting until something disrupted it. The truth slipped out before he could stop it. "I've never been with anyone," he said, the lantern light exposing the flush in his face. "I'm 40 and I don't know how to be close to someone." The confession hung between them, heavy and terrifying. Ethan expected discomfort, maybe pity. Instead, Clara shifted closer, her movements slow and deliberate. "Thank you for telling me," she said. There was no judgment in her voice, only warmth. "That takes courage." Her hand brushed his, not pulling away this time. Ethan's breath caught, his heart pounding so loud he was sure she could hear it. The touch was gentle, grounding, and for the first time in his life, he didn't feel embarrassed by his inexperience. He felt accepted. Later, the cold crept in, and Clara suggested sharing a blanket. They sat side by side, careful not to rush anything, the lantern flickering as rain continued to fall. Their shoulders touched, sending a quiet thrill through Ethan. Nothing more happened, yet the closeness felt profound. As the night wore on, Ethan realized he wasn't afraid anymore, not of being seen, not of being judged. The storm outside still raged, but inside the barn, something steady and hopeful had begun to take shape. By dawn, the storm had finally spent itself. The rain softened into a whisper, and pale sunlight slipped through the gaps in the barn. Settling gently on the wooden floor, Ethan woke to the unfamiliar awareness of another presence nearby. Clara sat a few feet away, wrapped in the blanket, watching the morning arrive as if she didn't want to disturb the quiet. They had earned together. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The silence felt different now, full instead of empty. Outside, the land looked washed clean. Ethan stepped out to check the road and returned with a small, almost shy smile. "Your car should make it now," he said, though the words felt heavier than they should have. Clara nodded, but she didn't move right away. She traced the rim of her coffee cup, gathering courage of her own. "I didn't expect this place," she said softly. "Or you." Ethan swallowed. All his life he had let moments pass him by, convinced they weren't meant for him. The thought of watching her leave without saying what sat in his chest felt unbearable. "I don't want this to end like it never mattered," he admitted. "Last night, it mattered to me." Clara met his eyes, really looking at him, and whatever she saw there made her step closer. "Then don't let it end that way," she said. "Ask me to stay." The words trembled out of him, awkward and sincere. She smiled and nodded, and the relief that washed over Ethan felt almost overwhelming. What followed was slow and uncertain, filled with nervous laughter, pauses and gentle reassurances. There was no urgency, no expectation, only trust growing moment by moment. When they finally closed the barn doors again, the outside world seemed far away. Later, they sat together in the quiet aftermath. Clara resting against his shoulder, Ethan hardly daring to breathe. He had waited 40 years for connection, and now it felt real in a way he'd never imagined. He wasn't ashamed of who he was or how long it had taken him to arrive here. When Clara eventually left that afternoon, it wasn't with finality. She kissed his cheek and promised to come back. Ethan stood watching her drive away, the ranch no longer feeling so vast or lonely. The storm had passed, but it had left something behind, hope, steady and warm, rooted deep in his chest. The days after the storm felt unreal to Ethan, as if time itself had softened around the edges. The ranch was the same, cattle lowing at dawn, fences waiting to be mended, dust clinging to his boots, but something inside him had shifted. He caught himself listening for a sound that wasn't there, half expecting Clara's voice to drift across the fields. At night, he replayed small details he hadn't realized mattered so much: the warmth of her laughter, the way she'd looked at him without hesitation, without doubt. He told himself not to expect anything. People passed through lives all the time. Still, when a familiar car appeared at the edge of the property 3 days later, his heart stuttered like it had forgotten its rhythm. Clara stepped out, hair loose, a tentative smile on her face, as if she wasn't sure she was welcome. Ethan crossed the distance faster than he meant to, stopping only when she stood right in front of him. "I said I'd come back," she said, almost apologetic. "I wasn't sure you would," he admitted, then flushed at his honesty. They spent the afternoon walking the land. Ethan showed her the creek that gave the ranch its name, the old oak where he'd eaten lunch for years in silence. Clara listened closely, asking questions no one ever had. She told him she'd postponed her trip, realizing she didn't want to keep running from places that felt real. The admission sat between them, fragile but hopeful. As evening fell, they cooked together in the small house, bumping elbows, laughing at mistakes. The closeness felt easier now, less frightening. When Clara reached for his hand, Ethan didn't freeze. He squeezed back, grounding himself in the certainty of her presence. Later, sitting on the porch, watching the sky fade into stars, Clara leaned against him. "I don't want to rush anything," she said, "but I don't want to walk away either." Ethan nodded, emotion tightening his throat. "Neither do I." For the first time, he allowed himself to imagine a future that wasn't empty or solitary. It wasn't grand or dramatic, just shared mornings, conversations, someone choosing to stay. As the night settled around them, Ethan realized that the storm hadn't just brought Clara to his barn. It had brought him to a version of himself who believed he deserved more and was finally brave, enough to reach for it.